3 days after burying my husband. Nathaniel. I stood in a crowded backyard for my nephew, Lucas's first birthday party. The blue birthday streamers fluttered in the breeze. But nobody dared to breathe. Me sister Shara tapped her champagne glass. Fake tears streaming down her perfect face. And announced to everyone that Lucas was actually Nathaniel's child. She pulled out a typed will and demanded half of my $8 million mansion as inheritance for his supposed bloodline. My mother Brenda rushed to wrap her arms around Sierra. My father Harrison puffed out his chest and told me to be reasonable. To do the right thing for the family. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at that fraudulent piece of paper, smiled coldly, and said, "Oh, easy." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. Because I knew a medical secret about my late husband that made her entire story a biological impossibility. The silence in the backyard was deafening. The gentle breeze rustled the blue birthday streamers. But nobody dared to breathe. I watched as Sierra wiped a perfectly timed tear from her cheek. Holding that fraudulent piece of paper like a winning lottery ticket, Nathaniel was a high school history teacher who loved his students and loved our life together. He had died suddenly from an aneurysm just weeks after his 35th birthday. My heart was still shattered into a million pieces. Yet here was my younger sister. 30 years old and always the golden child. Using my tragedy as a stage performance to steal my property before I could even process the sheer audacity of her lie, my parents leaped into action. They did not rush to comfort the daughter who had just become a widow. They did not ask if I was all right. Instead, my mother, Brenda, marched right past me and wrapped her arms around Sierra. My father, Harrison, stepped forward with his chest puffed out, putting on his best authoritative voice. He looked at me with the exact same look of disappointment he had used to control my entire life. "Audra, you need to be reasonable about this." My father announced loudly enough for all the guests to hear. "We know you are grieving. But Nathaniel has a son. You cannot just hoard that massive house all to yourself. You have to do the right thing for his bloodline." My mother nodded vigorously, rubbing Sierra's back. "You have always been so selfish with your wealth. Audra, you stage those luxurious multi-million-dollar mansions for your corporate clients, and you live like a queen while your sister struggles. It is only fair that Lucas gets what his father wanted him to have. Do not make this a legal battle. Just sign the deed over." The sheer entitlement made my blood boil, but I maintained my icy composure. I looked past my delusional parents and locked eyes with DeAndre. He was Sierra's hard-working husband. A 32-year-old restaurant manager who had always treated me with genuine kindness. DeAndre stood frozen near the barbecue grill. The paper plate he had been holding slipped from his hands and crashed onto the patio. Baked beans and potato salad splattered across his shoes. But he did not even flinch. His dark brown eyes were wide with sheer devastation. He was an honest African-American man who worked 6 zero-hour weeks to provide for a child he believed was his own. Now his wife was standing in front of their friends and neighbors, publicly declaring she had slept with her dead brother-in-law. Sierra started reaching a hand out toward him. But her voice lacked any real remorse. "I am so sorry you had to find out this way." DeAndre did not say a word. He stepped back from her touch, shaking his head in absolute disgust. "Sierra let out, a dramatic sob, playing the victim perfectly." "See what you made me do," she wailed, pointing an accusing finger at me. "My marriage is ruined because you would not just quietly share your wealth." I took a step forward, and the entire crowd seemed to brace for an explosion. But I did not give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I had spent my entire life being the responsible scapegoat. Now they wanted my house. I reached out and plucked the typed will right from Sierra's trembling hand. The paper felt cheap. I scanned the text quickly. It was riddled with 10 basic formatting errors. Nathaniel was the most meticulous man I had ever known. He would never draft a legal document that looked like a high school homework assignment. But the real joke was the demand itself. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my designer purse. Thank you for bringing this to my attention today. Sierra, I said, my voice perfectly level. It is incredibly enlightening. My father scoffed. We expect you to hand over the keys soon. I looked at him, feeling the very last thread of my loyalty snap completely. You are right. Dad, I replied smoothly, turning away from them. But you people are just strangers who happen to share my DNA. Do not call me. If any of you step foot on my property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. I walked out of that wretched backyard, leaving the blue streamers and the gaping crowd behind me, carrying a fake will and the knowledge that I held the weapon to destroy their arrogant lives forever. As I gripped the steering wheel and drove away from that wretched party, the blue birthday streamers faded in my rearview mirror, and I felt the very last thread of my loyalty snap clean in two. The weight of their betrayal settled into my bones. But instead of crushing me, it sharpened my mind into a blade. I held a secret weapon, and they had no idea. The forged will was still in my purse, and I could already see the 10 formatting errors that would make any competent lawyer laugh out loud. Nathaniel was a history teacher who obsessed over proper grammar and structure. He would never draft a legal document that looked like a cheap internet template. I smiled as I turned onto the winding road toward my estate. The iron gates opened automatically, closing securely behind me as I pulled into the immaculate driveway. My mansion stood silent, the crystal chandelier casting a cold, bright light over the empty foyer. I didn't shed a single tear. I walked straight to my home office, locked the heavy wooden doors, and sat in the dark, waiting for their next move. I knew my family. They wouldn't let this go quietly. They needed a villain to fund their lazy lifestyle. And they had just elected me to play the part. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the silence wrap around me. The plan was already forming in my mind. They thought they had cornered me with public humiliation and a fake will. But they had no idea that the document was riddled with errors. Nathaniel would never make margins shifting. Font inconsistencies. A signature cropped from an old Christmas card. I smiled in the darkness, knowing that I held the key to their destruction. And I would wait until they were so deep in their own lies that there was no escape. The explosion took exactly 48 hours to detonate. On Tuesday morning, my phone began vibrating violently against the kitchen counter. Notifications pouring in faster than my eyes could track them. Pings from Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn flooded my locked screen. I opened the first link sent by a concerned colleague and felt my stomach drop into an icy pit. Sierra had not just played the victim in private. She had gone completely nuclear. The video was professionally lit and heavily filtered. She sat on the floor of her cramped living room, clutching little Lucas to her chest, weeping beautifully for the camera. She claimed Nathaniel had been the love of her life, painting a tragic, completely fabricated picture of star-crossed lovers kept apart by duty. Then she dropped the real poison. She called me a barren, heartless widow. She told the internet that because my own womb was empty, my heart had turned to stone. She claimed I was deliberately hiding Nathaniel's assets and trying to throw my own flesh and blood nephew out onto the streets to starve. Directly below the video was a link to a GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help a Fatherless Child Survive His Cruel Aunt." The campaign had already raised $15,000 from gullible strangers who had never met any of us. My parents immediately shared the post. My mother, Brenda, wrote a lengthy caption detailing how she had failed to raise me with proper Christian values. My father, Harrison, commented that he was utterly ashamed to share my last name and begged his powerful business connections to donate. I scrolled through the comments feeling a surreal mix of disgust and fascination. Strangers were calling me a monster. Local community groups shared the video, demanding justice for the poor single mother. The sheer hypocrisy was suffocating. I decided to drop a single comment to provide some much-needed context. I typed out the harsh reality of our family dynamic, how I had been the sole financial backbone for a decade, how I paid off Sierra's $30. 000 credit card debt, how I bought her first car after she totaled my father's while driving under the influence. I thought facts would calm the mob. Have you ever tried to reason with a crowd that has already decided you're the villain? It was a massive mistake. The internet does not care about logic or financial receipts when they have a crying mother holding an innocent baby to pity. They accused me of gaslighting my sister, of using my massive wealth to bully a vulnerable woman. The narrative spun entirely out of my control. The real nightmare began the following morning. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, determined to maintain my professional routine. Aura Staging LLC was currently handling the interior design for 3 major penthouses downtown, and I had a staff of 20 people depending on my leadership. I drove toward the corporate plaza, but as I turned the corner, my heart sank into my stomach. A crowd of about 40 people had gathered on the sidewalk directly outside the glass doors of my corporate office. They held up handmade cardboard signs, "Justice for Lucas," "Share the Wealth," "Boycott Aura Staging." Sierra had tagged my business page in her latest post, and her mob of online defenders had mobilized into the real world. I parked in the underground secure garage and took the private elevator up to my floor. My receptionist looked completely panicked. The phones were ringing off the hook. Clients were demanding to know why there was an angry protest outside the building. 2 high-profile real estate developers emailed me directly, expressing deep concern over the negative public relations. In the luxury staging business, reputation is everything. My parents and my sister knew exactly what they were doing. They were hitting my livelihood to starve me out, hoping I would sign over the deed to the $8 million house just to make the nightmare stop. They assumed because I had always been the responsible, quiet daughter who dutifully paid their bills and absorbed their insults, I would eventually fold under the pressure. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, looking down at the angry protesters swarming the pavement below. They chanted slogans demanding I give up my wealth to a child that did not even belong to my husband. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Harrison. "Sign the house over." "Audra, we can call off these people today. Do not ruin your precious company over your stubborn pride." I stared at the glowing screen. They really believed they had me trapped. They believed that public humiliation and the threat of losing my corporate clients would force my hand. I locked my phone and placed it on my desk. Let them protest. Let them scream. They were playing checkers while I was setting up a completely different game entirely. The corporate phone started ringing off the hook at exactly 1017 that morning. My receptionist, Yenna, poked her head into my office with a pale face and whispered that 3 of our biggest clients were on hold. Demanding to know why there was a mob with cardboard signs outside our building, I took the first call from Vanguard Development Group, the CEO himself. A man who normally only spoke to me through his assistant. He said, "Audra, I have shareholders asking if we're associated with a woman who throws her nephew out on the street. I need an answer by noon or I'm pulling the contract." I kept my voice steady, told him it was a family dispute being handled legally, and promised a resolution within 24 hours. He hung up without a goodbye. The second call was worse. Elite Horizon Reality's board chairwoman, who had personally flown in for the final walkthrough of our downtown penthouse staging. She said, "This is a PR nightmare. Audra, I can't have my brand linked to a public scandal. Fix it or we're done." I set the receiver down gently and walked back to the floor-to-ceiling windows. 47 protesters now. By my count, some with children, holding signs that said "Justice for Lucas" and "Share the Wealth." Vito. My phone buzzed again. It was Harrison. The message read, "Sign the house over. Odra. We can call off these people today. Do not ruin your precious company over your stubborn pride. Do the right thing for Nathaniel's son." I stared at the glowing screen, feeling the cold steel of my spine straighten. They really believed this was checkmate. They thought the threat of losing my clients, the freeze on my personal accounts, the mob outside, they thought all of this would break me. I looked down at my reflection in the dark glass, at the faint outline of the city skyline behind me, and I felt a smile creep across my face. They were playing checkers, moving pawns, capturing one piece at a time, but I was already 3 moves ahead, setting up a queen sacrifice they'd never see coming. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the mahogany desk. Let them think I was trapped. Let them believe the pressure was working. I had already sent a text to my corporate legal team, asking them to prepare a folder. I had already asked my IT guy to pull the building's security footage from the moment my parents stormed in yesterday. I had already started a voice memo the second Harrison threatened me in my office. They thought I was cornered. But a cornered predator is the most dangerous thing in the world. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk, letting the protesters chant behind me. They were noise. I had a different game to play. I had barely settled into my leather chair when the glass doors of my office swung open, and a tall man in a cheap gray suit walked straight to my desk. He dropped a thick manila envelope onto my keyboard without a word. "You are served," he announced flatly, then turned and left before I could even ask his name. My heart hammered as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a massive stack of legal documents bearing the logo of the most aggressive probate litigation firm in the city, a firm known for tearing families apart for a percentage of the settlement. Sierra and my parents hadn't just hired any lawyer, they had brought in a shark. The first page was an emergency injunction, signed by a judge just hours earlier. The order froze every single one of my personal bank accounts, checking savings. The works. I couldn't withdraw a cent to buy a cup of coffee, let alone pay my staff. The next page placed a temporary lien on my $8 million mansion. The property was legally locked down. I couldn't sell it, transfer it, or use it as collateral until the probate investigation concluded. Sierra had claimed she and Lucas were at imminent risk of homelessness and that I was a flight risk who might liquidate Nathaniel's supposed assets to hide the money. The judge, swallowing her fabricated sob story, had granted the emergency freeze. I sat down heavily in my chair and stared at the glowing laptop screen. My personal funds were completely inaccessible. For a fleeting second, genuine panic clawed at my chest. But then I remembered my corporate accounts, the ones under Aura Staging LLC, were untouched. They'd frozen the wrong person. I took a slow breath and forced my face into a mask of defeat. Have you ever had to watch your own family weaponize the justice system against you? I was still holding that thought when my private office line rang. The caller ID showed my father's number. I picked up and said nothing. Harrison's voice dripped with smug satisfaction. "I assume you've received the delivery from our legal representatives by now." He paused, filling the silence with arrogance. "You've left us no choice. Audra, we tried to handle this internally like a family. But you had to be difficult. Now the courts are involved. Your personal money is gone. Your house is locked down. You are completely cornered with absolutely no way out." He offered me a way forward if I signed the deed over to Sierra that day. They would drop the injunction, call off the protesters, and forgive my hostility. All for the sake of the baby? I let him believe his strategy was working. "I need time to think," I said, injecting just enough hesitation into my voice. "I'll review the documents carefully." He warned me not to take too long, then hung up, convinced he had won. I placed the receiver back on the cradle and smiled. They thought they had cut off my air supply. They thought I was a desperate widow with no options. But I had the medical records, the recording of their extortion, and a corporate deed they hadn't even bothered to check. Cornering a predator only makes it more dangerous, and they had just cornered the wrong woman. The rain began to fall shortly after midnight, pounding relentlessly against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room. I was wide awake, sitting alone in the dark, wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket. The digital clock on the kitchen oven glowed a harsh green, 2:00 a.m. My mind was racing, analyzing every possible legal maneuver my corporate lawyers could deploy at dawn to fight the injunction. I had just hung up on Harrison's smug victory call, and the weight of their betrayal pressed down on my chest like concrete. But I refused to break. I was too angry to sleep. Then the front gate intercom buzzed, shattering the dead silence. I walked over and checked the security tablet mounted on the wall. Through the grainy night vision camera, I saw a solitary figure standing in the torrential downpour. It was DeAndre. He was drenched to the bone, shivering in a light jacket and clutching a dark canvas duffel bag tightly to his chest. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the button to unlock the heavy iron gate and walked quickly to the front door. Pulling it open just as he reached the covered porch, he stepped into the warm, brightly lit foyer, leaving a heavy trail of rainwater across the imported marble tiles. He looked completely shattered. The strong, proud man who worked 6 zero-hour weeks as a restaurant manager was gone. In his place stood a hollowed-out shell. His eyes were red and severely swollen. Carrying the unmistakable weight of profound betrayal, he dropped the wet duffel bag onto the floor with a heavy thud. It contained his entire life packed hurriedly in the middle of the night. I brought him a dry towel and poured him a tall glass of bourbon. We sat across from each other at the massive quartz kitchen island in complete silence for a very long time. The sound of the violent thunderstorm outside perfectly mirrored the emotional chaos raging within both of us. We were two innocent people drowning in two very different kinds of grief. I was mourning the sudden, tragic death of the man I loved, while he was mourning the sudden, violent death of the life he thought he had. I couldn't stay in that house. Audra, he finally whispered, his voice raspy and totally exhausted. She was sleeping soundly in the master bedroom like she hadn't just destroyed everything we built. I packed my bag and left. But before I walked out the front door, I did something I have never done before in my entire life. I violated her privacy. He reached into his damp jacket pocket and pulled out his smartphone. Placing it flat on the pristine white counter, he slid the glowing phone across the smooth surface toward me. I know Sierra better than anyone else, DeAndre explained, staring blankly at the glass of amber liquid in his shaking hands. I knew she was hiding something else beneath her public tears. She always uses the exact same password for everything. So I logged into her iCloud account from my laptop. I bypassed her security and went straight to her recently deleted messages folder. She thought she wiped the evidence completely clean. But she's not nearly as smart as she thinks she is. I picked up the phone and began reading the recovered text messages between Sierra and her two closest friends. The timestamp on the first conversation was from 3 weeks ago. Just 2 days after my husband suffered his fatal aneurysm. My stomach twisted into a cold hard knot as I read my sister's words. Sierra had not confessed to an affair out of guilt. She had meticulously orchestrated a hostile financial takeover. The messages detailed her exact legal strategy step by step. She told her friends she desperately needed a massive payout to escape her hidden credit card debt before her creditors sued her. She explicitly stated that Nathaniel being dead was the perfect opportunity because a corpse cannot request a paternity test. She outlined her entire plan to forge the will and ambush me at the birthday party to maximize public humiliation. They were laughing about it. Audra, DeAndre said, his voice breaking slightly. They were making sick jokes about how rich she was going to be once you surrendered the property. She used a dead man to secure a payday. And she used my innocent son as the ultimate bargaining chip. I kept scrolling through the damning messages. In one text, her friend asked if Sierra was worried about a court-ordered DNA test exposing the lie. Sierra responded with a crying laughing emoji and typed that she would simply refuse the test to protect her baby from trauma until I signed the house over. Because by then, it wouldn't matter who the father was. I set the phone down gently and looked directly at DeAndre. He met my gaze with a fierce, unwavering intensity. I already know Lucas is not my biological son, he stated, his tone dangerously calm. I've had suspicions for months because the timeline of her pregnancy never fully made sense. But I ignored the red flags because I loved that little boy unconditionally. Reading those deleted messages tonight confirmed something else for me. I am absolutely certain the boy is not Nathaniel's child either. The air in the kitchen shifted. The heavy, suffocating pressure of my parents' extortion suddenly felt irrelevant. I had a credible witness. Concrete digital evidence of premeditated financial fraud. And an ally just as intensely motivated as I was? We did not need to sign a contract. We formed a silent, ironclad pact in the quiet darkness of early morning, surrounded by the relentless pounding of rain. We were going to dismantle their lives piece by piece. DeAndre did not just bring deleted text messages to my house that night. He reached down into his damp duffel bag and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, smoothing it flat against the quartz countertop. It was a digital receipt from a highly reputable private genetics laboratory. I looked at the receipt and then back up at his exhausted face, trying to comprehend what he had done in the frantic moments before fleeing his broken home. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling heavily as he explained his final move before walking out on Sierra forever. Before I left the house, I went into the nursery, DeAndre said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas was fast asleep in his crib, hugging that little stuffed bear I bought him for his birthday. It broke my heart into a million pieces. Audra. It took every ounce of strength I had not to just break down and cry right there in the dark. But I knew I could not leave without securing the absolute truth. I used a sterile cotton swab from the bathroom, and I took a DNA sample from the inside of his cheek. He tapped the digital receipt on the counter with a heavy finger. I packed the sample, sealed it perfectly, and dropped it into a priority overnight shipping box at the 4-hour post office on my way here. I paid for the most expensive expedited testing they offer. They will compare his DNA to mine and run it through a massive global ancestry database. In less than 72 hours, I will have legally admissible proof that the boy is not mine. And we might just find out who the real father actually is. I stared at him in complete awe. In the absolute worst moment of his entire life, while his heart was actively being ripped out of his chest, DeAndre had the profound mental clarity to secure biological evidence. He was not just a victim crying in the dark. He was a man meticulously building an airtight legal case against the woman who destroyed him. His proactive brilliance gave me the final push I needed. It was time to hand him the missing piece of the puzzle. It was time to reveal the secret I had been guarding fiercely since the day I married Nathaniel. I stood up from the kitchen stool without saying a word and walked down the long, dark hallway toward my private study. The rain continued to pound against the windows, but the sound faded into a dull hum as my heartbeat took over. I approached the heavy steel floor safe hidden behind a bookshelf in the corner of the room, the one I had installed the year Nathaniel and I bought this house. The one he never even knew existed. I typed in the secure passcode, turning the heavy metal dial until it clicked open with a soft thud. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I reached into the very back of the safe, bypassing the corporate documents and luxury real estate deeds, the things that kept my business alive. Behind a false panel, I pulled out a single thin manila folder. It was old, its edges slightly frayed from years of being carefully hidden away. The paper inside had yellowed at the corners, but the ink was still crisp and clear. I walked back into the kitchen and dropped the folder right on top of DeAndre's digital laboratory receipt. He looked at the blank cover and then up at me with a confused expression, his eyes still carrying the raw exhaustion of the night. "You're about to pay a lot of money to a genetics lab to prove that Nathaniel is not the father of your wife's baby," I said, my voice completely steady. But you don't need to do that. Deandra, I can save you the anxiety of wondering if my husband ever betrayed you. I already know for an absolute medical fact that Sierra is lying. I opened the folder and slid the top document toward him. It was a certified medical report from the oncology department of the university hospital, heavily stamped and signed by 3 different physicians. The letterhead was embossed. The date clear, Nathaniel was 18 years old at the time. DeAndre's eyes scanned the dense medical terminology, his brow furrowing as he read. I waited, letting the words sink in. When Nathaniel was 18 years old, I explained, watching his face shift from confusion to disbelief. He contracted a terrifyingly severe case of leukemia. He was hospitalized for over a week with a dangerously high fever. The virus caused massive internal complications. It completely and permanently destroyed his reproductive system. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Before we even got engaged, Nathaniel sat me down and cried for hours. He told me he was diagnosed as 100% irreversibly sterile. He could never biologically father a child. DeAndre froze mid-read. He stopped breathing for a solid 5 seconds. Then he read the highlighted conclusion at the bottom of the medical document a second time, just to make sure his exhausted mind was not playing tricks on him. The paper clearly stated, 0, viable sperm count. Permanent, untreatable sterility. We never told a single living soul. I continued, leaning closer to him. You know how my parents are. My father, Harrison, is obsessed with bloodlines and legacy and leaving a mark on the world. My mother, Brenda, would have endlessly gossiped about it at her country club brunches. They would have constantly belittled Nathaniel and treated him like he was less of a man just because he could not give them a biological grandchild. We wanted to protect our peace. So we buried the medical records and simply told everyone we were focusing on our careers instead of having kids. DeAndre slowly pushed the file back toward me. A dark, incredibly satisfying smile began to form on his face, replacing the hollow devastation that had consumed him just an hour ago. She didn't know, he whispered, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Sierra had absolutely no idea. She just picked Nathaniel because he was a wealthy, successful man who happened to die suddenly. She figured a dead man couldn't demand a paternity test. She saw your $8 million estate sitting there and assumed she could just fabricate a scandalous affair to extort you. She built an entire legal strategy on a biological impossibility. Exactly, I replied, feeling the cold rush of absolute victory coursing through my veins. Sierra forged a legal will and filed a hostile injunction to claim an inheritance for a baby that physically cannot exist. She has committed multiple felonies based on a lie that we can instantly destroy with one piece of paper from this folder. We can't show our hand yet, I said, sliding the manila folder back into the steel safe and locking it with a sharp click. The rain was still hammering against the windows, but the room felt warmer now, charged with a new kind of energy. DeAndre stood by the kitchen island, his arms crossed, his wet shirt still clinging to his shoulders. I walked back toward him, my bare feet silent on the cold marble. If we walk into the police station tonight with these medical records, Sierra gets arrested by sunrise. But she'll claim it was all a misunderstanding, that she was confused, that someone else manipulated her. My parents will hire a fleet of lawyers to plead temporary insanity, and she'll be out on bail before the ink on the arrest warrant dries. We can't let her off that easy. DeAndre nodded slowly, his jaw tight. We need her to dig herself so deep that there's no ladder out. No excuse. No victim narrative. No way to spin it as a mistake. He picked up the digital receipt from the DNA lab and tucked it into his jacket pocket. I'll stay in the guest house. We keep our heads down. We let them believe they're winning. The more public they go, the more evidence they leave behind. I reached for my phone and checked the time. 3:47 a.m. The storm was beginning to ease, the rain softening to a steady drizzle. Tomorrow morning. I'll go to the office like nothing happened. I'll let Harrison and Brenda storm in and threaten me. I'll let them record themselves committing extortion. And when the DNA results come back in 72 hours, we'll have everything we need to burn them in front of a live audience. DeAndre looked at me, his eyes hollow but resolute. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? He asked quietly. I didn't answer, I just nodded. Because we both knew the answer. We stood in the dim kitchen for a long moment. Two strangers bound by a shared enemy. Then he turned and walked toward the guest house, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I watched him disappear into the dark hallway, then poured myself a glass of water and sat alone at the island, listening to the last drops of rain slide off the roof. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was let them walk right into it. The next morning arrived with a glaring sunlight that burned through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but I felt no warmth. I dressed in my sharpest charcoal suit, walked past the remaining protesters, still chanting outside my building, and took the private elevator to my corporate suite. I had just settled into my leather chair and started reviewing a digital rendering for a new high-rise project when the heavy glass doors of Aura Staging LLC suddenly and violently swung open. My receptionist let out a startled gasp. But she couldn't stop them. Harrison and Brenda stormed past her desk, ignoring her protests, and marched straight into my private office. Harrison didn't bother with a greeting. He slammed his hands down on my mahogany desk with such force that my neatly organized architectural blueprints scattered across the hardwood floor. Brenda stood right behind him, clutching her designer handbag and glaring at me with pure hatred. You are making a massive mistake. Audra, my father growled, his face flushing an ugly shade of red. We gave you 24 hours to sign the deed. I just got off the phone with our lawyers. And you haven't even contacted them. You're stalling. I didn't flinch. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and watched them. Harrison leaned closer, his voice dropping into a vicious whisper. I know exactly who your biggest clients are. Vanguard Development Group. Elite Horizon Reality. If you don't sign the house over to Sierra by 5 o'clock this evening, I will personally call the CEO of Vanguard and the board of Elite Horizon. I'll tell them you're a morally bankrupt monster who throws her dead husband's infant son out on the streets. I'll send them the link to Sierra's GoFundMe. I'll make sure your reputation is destroyed so completely that you'll never stage a single closet in this city again. I let his threat hang in the silence. Then, without a word, I reached my right hand under the lip of my desk and pressed the hidden panic alarm twice. At the same time, I moved a stack of blueprints aside, revealing my secondary smartphone. I tapped the screen and hit the red record button on the voice memo app. The timer started 14 minutes and 32 seconds of their explicit threats. Have you ever had someone threaten to destroy everything you built just to steal what's yours? I smiled coldly at my father. You just committed felony extortion. Harrison. And I have every word of it saved to my cloud. The heavy glass doors swung open, and 3 armed security guards stepped into the room. They surrounded my parents, and the lead officer asked if there was a problem. Yes, I said smoothly. These 2 individuals were just leaving. They are permanently banned from this building. Harrison's face went white. Brenda started hyperventilating. Silently, I tapped the stop button on the recording. The 3 security guards moved with practiced precision, positioning themselves on either side of my parents. Harrison's chest heaved, his face still flushed with rage. But his eyes darted to the lead guard's utility belt, and he went rigid. Brenda grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. But she didn't say a word. I picked up my secondary smartphone, holding it so the glowing screen faced them. I recorded every single word you just said. I announced, my voice carrying through the silent office. The threats to destroy my business. The demand for my property under duress, that's felony extortion. punishable by up to 4 years in state prison. I have multiple witnesses and a time-stamped audio file. Brenda let out a choked sob. Harrison opened his mouth to argue, but the lead guard stepped directly into his path, blocking his advance. "Sir, you need to leave the building immediately," the officer said, his tone flat and final. Harrison's shoulders sagged. He looked at me one last time, his eyes burning with hatred and something else, fear. He had finally realized I wasn't bluffing. Without another word, he turned and marched toward the elevator, dragging Brenda behind him by the elbow. She didn't look back. I waited until the elevator doors slid shut before I exhaled. Then I turned to the lead guard. "These 2 individuals are permanently banned from this building and the plaza outside. If they return, I want them arrested for criminal trespassing." "Understood." "Miss Audra," he said, and the 3 guards filed out. Once the glass doors clicked shut, I sat down heavily in my leather chair. My hands were steady as I opened the voice memo app. Renamed the file Extortion Evidence, WAV, and tapped the cloud upload icon. The progress bar filled to 100% in less than 10 seconds. The recording was safely stored on 2 separate cloud servers, encrypted with corporate-grade security. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, the last of the protesters were dispersing, their cardboard signs now limp in the rain. My parents' car screeched out of the parking lot. I smiled, not a happy smile, but the kind of smile you get when the trap closes exactly as planned. They thought they had cornered me, but they had just handed me the proof of their own destruction. I didn't waste a single second basking in my victory over my parents. I grabbed my leather briefcase, slid the forged will and the injunction documents inside, and drove straight to the downtown high-rise that housed my corporate legal team. Marcus, my senior litigator, had been with me through 7 years of real estate wars. He never flinched at pressure. His corner office overlooked the river, and he was already waiting when I walked in, his silver-framed glasses catching the afternoon light. I dropped the manila envelope onto his glass conference table without a word. "I need you to dismantle this completely," I said. "My sister filed it with the probate court yesterday. It froze my personal accounts and placed a lien on the mansion." Marcus opened the envelope, scanned the first page, and let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. "Audra, this document is an absolute joke. The formatting is inconsistent, the margins shift between pages. The legal terminology in paragraph 3 contradicts the jurisdiction clause in paragraph 5. Whoever drafted this didn't go to law school. They downloaded a free template and filled in the blanks." I nodded. "I know it's sloppy, but the judge acted on it anyway. I need proof, undeniable proof, that it's a fabrication." Marcus picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button. Within 2 minutes, a younger man in a dark suit entered. His name was David, the firm's digital forensics specialist. He spent his days analyzing forged corporate contracts and fraudulent signatures for multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Marcus handed him the will. "Full forensic analysis. I need the metadata and the signature deconstructed. It was filed electronically. Pull the original PDF from the county database and tell me exactly how it was built." David took the document and left without a word. For the next hour, Marcus and I reviewed my corporate accounts, confirming that Aura Staging LLC was completely insulated from the personal freeze. Sierra thought she had cut off my money, but my corporate wealth remained untouched. Then David returned, carrying a sleek silver tablet. He placed it on the glass table and swiped to enlarge a high-resolution image of the last page. The text was stitched together using a free open-source word processor. David explained, "The digital footprint is clear in the metadata, but the real smoking gun is the signature." He zoomed in on Nathaniel's bold ink signature. At first glance, it looked perfect, but as David zoomed closer, The black ink blurred into tiny, jagged squares. This signature was not signed on this piece of paper. It was digitally cropped from another source and photoshopped onto the document. See the pixelation around the loops, and here at the end of the letter S, there's a tiny white gap inside the black line. That's an inkskip flaw. I stared at the screen, and my heart froze. I had seen that exact flaw before. I pulled out my phone, opened my digital photo backup, and found the folder labeled Christmas 2019. Nathaniel had signed every holiday card with a heavy black fountain pen. I zoomed in on his signature from the card we sent to my parents, and there it was, the identical ink skip at the end of the S. She had cropped his signature from a 4-year-old Christmas card. She scanned the card, copied his name, and pasted it onto a fake will using a basic photo editor. The document was clearly, indisputably a forgery. I stared at the screen. The Christmas card signature glowing next to the forged will. Marcus leaned over, his eyes tracing the identical ink skip. That's felony forgery. Audra. She cropped a dead man's signature from a holiday card and pasted it onto a legal document. The judge relied on this to freeze your accounts. That's perjury, she swore under oath. It was genuine. And because she used it to extort an $8 million asset, we're looking at aggravated fraud. Each of those carries years in federal prison. Probably 10 to 14 combined. Given the scale, he closed his laptop and looked at me, his eyes hard. I can have a motion drafted and a DA meeting scheduled by sunrise. We walk this into the courthouse tomorrow morning. And Sierra spends the night in a holding cell. No bail flight risk. Given the premeditation. Your accounts unfrozen by noon? Case closed. My hand trembled on the edge of the table. The temptation was overwhelming. I could end it right now. Watch her get dragged out of her house in handcuffs. Watch Harrison's face crumble when he realized his golden child was a felon. But the image of their smug victory calls, the protesters chanting outside my building, the GoFundMe bleeding $15. 000 from strangers. I wanted more than justice. I wanted a public execution. No, I said, my voice steady. I want them to feel like they've won first. I want Harrison to show up at his country club with his chest puffed out, telling everyone he broke me. I want Sierra to post another video promising a mansion tour. I want Bradley and Eleanor sitting in my living room, watching the trap snap shut in front of a live audience. Marcus held my gaze for a long moment. You're sure giving them more time means more evidence. But it also gives them more rope to hang themselves. I'm sure, I repeated. He nodded slowly, then slid the tablet with the forensic report into a locked drawer behind his desk. The evidence stays here until you call. I'll draft the dismissal motion for the injunction off the record, in case we need to pull it at midnight. But once that drawer opens, there's no stopping it. I felt a cold calm settle over me. Let them dig, I said. Have you ever had to choose between winning fast and winning in front of everyone who ever doubted you? Marcus didn't answer. He just pressed the lock with a click that sounded like a gavel falling. Marcus locked the drawer with a click that echoed through the glass-walled office. Then he reached across the table and picked up the thick manila envelope containing the injunction that had frozen my personal accounts and placed a lien on my mansion. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the specific property claims Sierra had filed with the probate judge. I watched his expression shift from professional scrutiny to something I'd never seen on him before, a slow, spreading grin that bordered on laughter. What is it? I asked. Leaning forward, he shook his head, tapping his pen against the legal document. Your sister and your parents hired a top-tier probate litigation firm, but in their frantic rush to freeze your assets before you could fight back, they completely skipped doing a basic county property records check. They filed a hostile claim against an $8 million asset, assuming it was standard marital property owned by you and Nathaniel. He slid the injunction across the glass toward me, his eyes gleaming. Audra. They placed a legal lien on a house that you do not even personally own. I took the paper. Reading the property description, the irony hit me like a wave of cold relief. When my staging business started generating serious revenue 5 years ago, I made a strategic decision. I purchased that mansion entirely under the corporate umbrella of Aura Staging LLC. It's a dual-purpose investment to host high-end clients and showcase our design work. Nathaniel fully supported it. His name was never on the deed. My personal name isn't on it either. The house is a 100% corporate asset. Marcus tossed the injunction back onto the table with a look of pure legal triumph. This entire legal freeze is built on sand. A probate judge has zero jurisdiction to place a lien on a corporate asset for a personal inheritance dispute. I can draft a dismissal motion right now. We walk to the courthouse. Have it thrown out by noon? Your personal accounts unfrozen. The property lien erased completely. The temptation was overwhelming. One phone call and the pressure would vanish. But I thought of Harrison's smug voice on the phone, of Sierra's victory video promising a mansion tour, of Bradley and Eleanor walking into my trap. I wanted them to feel invincible before I tore them apart. No, I said, my voice ice cold. Don't file that motion yet. Marcus, if we destroy their legal leverage today, they'll know we're on to them. I want them to keep believing they're winning. I want them so arrogant that they invite the whole city to watch me surrender. Let my personal account stay frozen. Let the house stay under that useless lien. We're not just winning a court case. We're burning their social standing to the ground. Marcus nodded slowly. You've got a permit for that fire. I smiled. I've got the matches. I slid the useless injunction back into the envelope and stood. Keep the forensic report ready. I'll call you when it's time to drop the bomb. I walked out of his office. The marble floor cold beneath my heels. Feeling the trap I had set tightening around my family's necks. The expedited laboratory results arrived on Wednesday morning. Just 48 hours after DeAndre had dropped the swab into the overnight box. I was standing in the kitchen, nursing a black coffee, when his phone buzzed on the court's countertop. He picked it up, his face unreadable, and tapped the screen once. The official genetics report loaded in a secured PDF viewer. The heavy black text at the bottom of the page was undeniable. Probability of paternity 0%. DeAndre was not the father. He exhaled slowly. A sound that carried a year of stolen paychecks and broken trust? But he didn't stop there. He tapped again. Opening the second tab, the Ancestry database cross-reference. The screen populated a genetic family tree. And the highest match wasn't a distant cousin or a vague geographical cluster. It was a first-degree relative of Bradley, Harrison's wealthy best friend, his Sunday golf partner, the man who owned half the downtown skyline. The puzzle pieces clicked together with a sickening snap. Sierra had been having an affair with Bradley, gotten pregnant, and when Bradley refused to leave his wife and cut her off financially, she panicked. She passed the child off as DeAndre's to secure a stable life. But the moment Nathaniel died, she saw a golden payday, a dead man who couldn't demand a paternity test. An $8 million mansion ripe for the taking. This explained her obsession with status, her panic when Bradley stopped answering her calls, and the desperation behind that forged will. DeAndre set the phone down and looked at me. His eyes were cold, focused. We finally have the weapon to destroy her. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? That morning, I chose myself. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. I typed slowly, crafting a message that radiated utter defeat. I can't keep fighting. You win. I'm ready to surrender the house. Please bring the final transfer deeds to my mansion tonight for a formal will reading and mediation dinner. Within seconds, 3 red receipts appeared. Brenda replied with a sickeningly sweet, "Thank you." Harrison confirmed 7:00 p.m. sharp. And then a push notification lit up my screen. Sierra had just posted a victory video, promising her followers a mansion tour by the weekend. She was already packing her champagne glasses. I barely had time to lock my phone after sending the surrender text when another message came through, this time from Brenda. Her tone was dripping with condescension. "We're bringing a few special witnesses to make sure you don't try any last-minute tricks." Audra. Just neutral parties to observe the signing. I unlocked the group chat and read the list sheet attached. 3 of the wealthiest country club friends, the kind of people who'd applaud a public humiliation, and right at the top, Bradley and his wife Eleanor. My breath caught, but not with fear. A cold smile spread across my face. They were delivering my ultimate weapon into my own home. I typed back a calm reply. "Of course. Mother. I'll set extra places at the table." Then I walked into the formal dining room and pulled out a heavy mahogany chair, the seat directly across from where Sierra would sit. That chair was for Bradley. I wanted him to have a front-row view of everything that was about to unfold. The perfect audience for my coup de grace. Have you ever known exactly when the trap was about to spring? I felt it in my bones as I adjusted the silverware, polished the wine glasses, and imagined the look on their faces when the truth came crashing down. They thought they were coming to celebrate their victory. They had no idea they were walking into their own funeral. At exactly 7:00 p.m., the heavy brass doorbell echoed through the silent mansion. I smoothed my black silk blouse, took one steadying breath, and pulled open the massive oak doors. The cold evening air swept in. Carrying the scent of expensive cologne and arrogance, Harrison and Brenda stood at the front, practically vibrating with smug anticipation. Behind them, Sierra stepped forward in a tight designer dress that screamed, "I spent your frozen money." Bradley followed. His tailored charcoal suit immaculate but his face pale and stiff. He looked like a man walking into a board meeting. He already knew he'd lose. Eleanor held his arm, her polite smile hiding the confusion in her eyes. I didn't offer warm greetings. I simply stepped aside and let them flow into the living room. The space was designed to intimidate 20-foot ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark city skyline, and an 80-inch smart television seamlessly mounted into the black marble fireplace. DeAndre stood silently in the far corner, wearing a sharp black suit, his arms crossed, his face neutral. He was the perfect observer. Sierra didn't waste a second. She marched straight to the center of the room and slapped a thick manila folder onto the glass coffee table with a sharp crack. "Here are the final settlement papers." "Audra," she announced, her voice shrill and echoing off the high ceilings. "Hand me a pen so you can sign the deed transfer, and we can finally pop the expensive champagne I know you keep in that massive cellar." Harrison stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He turned to face Bradley and Eleanor, launching into a rehearsed speech about family and forgiveness. "We know this has been a difficult week," he began, his voice dripping with false benevolence. "But tonight is about doing the right thing. Audra has finally seen the light. Family blood is thicker than any corporate misunderstanding. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave with a speech they rehearsed in the mirror?" I felt the cold satisfaction settle into my bones as Harrison's words bounced off the marble. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting to DeAndre. Then to me. Eleanor nodded politely, but her fingers tightened around her pearl necklace. I waited until Harrison paused for effect. Then I walked over to the media console, picked up the remote, and pressed a single silver button. The massive television flared to life. I didn't look at their confused faces. I just watched the trap close. The 80-inch screen came to life with a stark, black-and-white scan of an official medical document. The bold letterhead from the State University Hospital's oncology department filled the wall, and I let the image sit for a full 3 seconds before I zoomed straight to the diagnostic conclusion. The yellow highlight box covered the words, "total azoospermia." 100% irreversible sterility. Zero viable sperm count. Sierra had been mid-step toward the coffee table. She froze. Her designer heels scraped the marble as she stopped dead. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might collapse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Harrison's rehearsed speech died in his throat. He stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. His brain refusing to connect the dots. I lowered the remote and turned to face them. My voice calm and clear. That's a certified copy of Nathaniel's complete medical history. He contracted severe leukemia at 18. The chemotherapy destroyed his reproductive system permanently. He was diagnosed sterile years before we even met. He could never father a child. The silence was absolute. Bradley sat frozen on the velvet sectional, his face the color of wet cement. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Brenda let out a tiny, strangled gasp. Sierra just stood there, her fake confidence evaporating into thin air, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. I turned back to the media console, this time pulling out a heavy black leather binder. But that's not the only thing you got wrong. Sierra, you filed an injunction against a house that wasn't even Nathaniel's to leave you. This mansion is owned entirely by Aura Staging LLC. It's a corporate asset. Probate court has zero jurisdiction over corporate property. I dropped the binder onto the glass table with a thud. Your forged will and your emergency freeze are completely worthless. The heavy silence shattered when DeAndre stepped forward, moving past Bradley without a glance. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick legal binder, slamming it onto the glass table hard enough to rattle the champagne flutes. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Divorce papers, he announced, his voice flat and final. And a civil lawsuit for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and massive financial restitution. He held up a second piece of paper, the DNA report. 0% paternity. The ancestry database matches Bradley as the biological father. I already froze every joint account you and I shared. Sierra. The car. The savings. Everything I paid for. It's all mine now. You walk out of this house tonight with nothing but the clothes on your back. Sierra dropped to her knees, scrambling across the polished marble to grab his pant leg. DeAndre. Please, you can't leave me with nothing. I have a baby. I'll do anything. He stepped backward, ripping his leg from her grasp. Don't touch me. Harrison let out a guttural roar and lunged at Bradley, grabbing him by the lapels and slamming him against the marble fireplace. You ruined my family. You arrogant bastard. He pulled back his fist. But before he could swing, Eleanor rose from the sofa with a calm that froze everyone in place. She walked up to Bradley, looked him dead in the eyes, and slapped him across the face hard. The crack echoed off the high ceilings. Then she turned, walked out the front door without a word, and disappeared into the night. The police sirens wailed up the driveway, red and blue lights flooding through the windows. 6 officers stormed through the open front door, the lead detective barking orders. Sierra and Harrison, you are under arrest for felony forgery, tonfrou, and extortion. Sierra screamed as they cuffed her. Harrison offered no resistance, his head hanging in defeat. The officers dragged them past the velvet sectional, past the forged will still lying on the glass table, and into the waiting cruisers. I stood beside DeAndre, watching the flashing lights fade down the driveway. The silence settled like a second skin clean. Cold. And final, 5 years. That's what the judge handed Sierra after she took a plea deal, 5 years in a federal prison. Stripped of her internet access, her designer wardrobe, and every ounce of the pity she'd milked from strangers, Harrison's empire crumbled faster. Bradley, desperate to protect his own assets from Eleanor's divorce lawyers, liquidated every investment he had in my father's name. The mansion they fought so hard to keep foreclosed. The country club membership revoked. My parents ended up in a 2-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and neighbors who played music at 2 a.m. I blocked their numbers permanently. DeAndre did something I didn't expect. He filed for guardianship of little Lucas. He said the boy was innocent. And he'd be damned if Sierra ever used him as a bargaining chip again. We don't talk about revenge anymore. We toast to Nathaniel with a glass of vintage champagne on my balcony, watching the city lights blink below. The mansion is mine. The business is thriving. And the toxic people who tried to bury me, they're the ones 6 feet under. If you've ever had to protect your peace from people who share your blood, I hope this story reminds you that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And hit subscribe if you believe that justice, no matter how slow, always finds its way home.